Welcome to Tea with the Experts and Dr. Leah Merle, your premier destination for mental health insights, empowerment, and inspiration. Led by the passionate therapist and counsellor educator, Dr. Leah Merle, this interview-style podcast delves deep into diverse themes with top-notch experts in the field. Beginning with the What Is series, from anxiety, trauma to resilience and mindfulness. We sip our way through captivating conversations, psychological insights, shedding light on the complexities of mental wellness and what it means to be a human being. Each episode serves up a refreshing blend of knowledge, empathy, and empowerment, aiming to destigmatize mental health issues and raise awareness in an engaging and approaching manner. So grab your favorite cuppa and get ready to step yourself into transformative conversations that will leave you feeling uplifted and enlightened. Subscribe now and join the movement to break down barriers and foster a more compassionate world.
Welcome to Tea with the Experts. I'm Dr. Leah Merle, and today we have a really special and courageous guest. Julie Beem is a trauma survivor, and she's here today to share her personal journey with us. I feel so grateful that you are sharing your story, Julie, and thank you for joining us. I'm so appreciative of the wisdom that you're about to share to normalize these trauma experiences and just share that a lot of people go through this. Yes. And I think that you're a very special person, and I feel honored to be able to be here today to share with you. Thank you for being here, Jules.
Thank you for asking me.
Absolutely. So let's kind of dive in a little bit to start to understand your story. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you grew up? Let's kind of start there.
I was born as a child that was conceived out of wedlock. My biological mother was married to her first husband, but I was not his child. At first, they tried to stay married and things didn't work out and they divorced. I'm not sure if that's where we wanted to start. I don't know.
But perfect.
It's very key to who I am and my experiences. So growing up, understanding, especially in the late 70s, early 80s, it was still very taboo.
Definitely.
To be a child of infidelity and, all the drama that went with that. I also grew up in a military environment. I was born in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
Yeah.
So there's that. And I think that definitely played a part in how I was raised. My biological mother had 3 other kids before me with her first husband. And as I said, they decided to stay married after she got pregnant with me. I was about 4 years old when they divorced. And she married her second husband, who raised me, who's my stepfather, from the age of 4.5 on. They were only married for about 3.5, maybe 4 years. Their first child together, my little brother, was born shortly after they got married because it was the same situation. She got pregnant while she was still married to her first husband. All of that. Lots of drama. Very soap opera. And they were married for a very short period of time. When they got divorced, he fought for custody of me, even though I wasn't his biological child. I was told when I was younger that it was because she was an alcoholic and he wanted to save me from how she would have been with me. I heard a lot of very disparaging remarks on her growing up, that she wasn't stable, wasn't okay. He saved me from her and all of that. And that's what I grew up believing. And from the age of 8, I only heard from her maybe 3 or 4 times until I was in my late 20s when I met her again. So Jim raised me from the age of 4.5. And then he was a single father by the time I was 8. That in itself alone is trauma. Like the breaking up of my family more than one time. So 4.5, I lost my siblings and the house that I started my life in. And then by 8, my mom was gone. And I had an older stepbrother and a younger half brother. He's my baby brother, but half brother. We had the same mom, different. From there, it's kind of, one of the questions was, how did you survive, or what did your trauma experiences? I didn't understand it at that age. I was 8 years old the first time I was SA'd, and it was by my older. And when I came forward to the adults that were there in my life at the time, it was very adamantly, it never happened. You didn't experience that. You're making stuff up to get attention. He would never do that to you. Why are you lying? You know,
so your experience, you shared, what it sounds like is you shared with the adults in your life that you were sexually assaulted.
Correct.
And they minimized that experience. And they didn't know how to handle it, but told you that it wasn't what happened.
Right. Exactly. So from that point, that was like one of the big ones. Definitely affected me and how I perceived myself, because I had this truth inside me, but like everybody told me that it wasn't real and that I was making it up, you know. At that time when that happened, my stepfather was actually deployed on a deployment overseas. I think it was Desert Storm at the time. And he had his first wife, who was my stepbrother's mom, taking care of us. And she was very abusive, very, very mean. She made awful comments about my body. Like, it just, let's just stack up the traumas, right? So, because I was not a typical small child. I had big shoulders. I had, you know, a little bit of a belly, thick thighs. And at that time of our society, that being skinny was like everything, right? You had to be thin. You had to be small. Like, my stature was very looked down on. And she was a larger woman. So it's kind of surprising coming from her. But that, on top of the sexual assault and then just general neglect, we were left alone very often to our own devices. When he got back from deployment, I don't believe she ever told him what had happened. And because of the denial of it, I kept it to myself. Eventually, my older stepbrother moved to live with his mom and moved out of the home. And my stepbrother had multiple girlfriends over the years who were also very abusive. I witnessed one of his girlfriends that moved in with us beating her children. And I think I would probably have been about 10, maybe 11 when that was happening. Lots and lots of drama, lots and lots. I'm not kidding. It was soap opera. Like, we were the Jerry Springer family. That's the best way to type it. And still, I grew up believing that all of that was normal. You know, when you're in that situation and you're in that environment and you don't have any outside influences, that's just an everyday occurrence. It's not something that you see as a problem, because that's just how everybody around you is.
Well, your all of this is normalized.
Yes, very much. Very, very much.
Yeah.
When I was 13, my stepfather started dating 2 women at the same time. And I didn't understand it at the time. And there's a lot of lingo that I didn't get. But I've learned since then that it was something called emotional incest. He basically used me as a surrogate wife whenever he wasn't dating someone, as like an emotional support. He like leaned on me, you know, all of those things. It was terrible. But again, I had no clue that that wasn't how it was supposed to be. And he did eventually marry one of the women that he was dating. Her name is Sherry. And for a couple of years, we had idyllic family life. It felt like, oh my gosh, everything is settled. Like, this feels really great. We had family game night. She cooked dinner all the time. And that's, I think, another key part. Before they married, and even some after, my stepfather treated me like a housewife. I cooked and cleaned and did all this. And from the age of 8, if there wasn't another woman in the home, I was the woman of the home. And I was responsible for my baby brother, who was 5 years older than me. And again, I didn't understand that was traumatic. Like, it was just how it was. I had no clue. From there, after a couple of years into their marriage, things started to get a little rocky, and it's all kind of a bit of a blur. There was 2 they both had boys the same age, and they both had a lot of stuff going on. So I was kind of just floating off in the background, and I make a joke about it, but now I see it as, oh, that wasn't okay. But I always joked that as long as I did my chores, they did not care where I was or what I was doing. So I could come home at 2:00 in the morning and they would not care as long as the dishes were done, the floors were clean, the laundry was folded. Like, it didn't matter. That's how it felt to me. They might not see it that way, but that's how it felt to me.
That's your experience, your experience of what you went through.
And then the next big thing that happened when I graduated high school, I was 19. I had been held back a couple of years throughout, like because of the divorce and all the things going on. They suggested it was a good idea. So I was 19 when I graduated high school. And a few months before I graduated, they sat me down and told me that I needed to move out when I graduated. And I had no clue what to do or how to manage that. So when the summer of my graduating high school came and they said, "Where are you going? You need to move out." And I had nowhere to go. So my stepfather graciously offered me the garden shed as a place to sleep because I needed to move out because we only had 3 bedrooms in that house and they wanted to give my 2 younger brothers their own rooms. Later on, I would come to find out that one of the reasons for that was because my parents were involved in a swinging lifestyle and they didn't want me to find out. And all throughout this, I had started going to church when I was a younger kid because it was a place to get away. I realize that now. It was a safer place than at home. So I practically lived at church. And so, they didn't want me to find out that they were swinging, or that was their excuse. But honestly, I think that they just wanted one less thing to deal with or whatever. So I lived in a garden shed. I slept on an army cot next to a lawnmower with all of my worldly possessions stacked up around me. And then eventually moved in with a young couple from the church. And that started a snowball avalanche effect of living with a ton of entirely inappropriate people, dealing with a lot of things. And again, I didn't understand that my choices were trauma related. It's like I told you earlier, one of the things I grew up hearing all the time was, you can't use your trauma as an excuse. You can't, you're using your trauma as an excuse. You need to just buckle down, pull yourself up, to work harder. You can do this. And I did not have any clue that the things that had happened to me in my childhood were affecting the decisions that I was making as a young adult. Right. No clue. Because you grow up in that and you're just like, oh, okay, I'm the screw up. I'm the one that can't figure it out. I couldn't manage money to save my life, made a ton of really bad financial decisions. And that just tanked it more in the eyes of this family that I had that, she's, got bad credit and that's such a failing. And then in my early 20s, I started working at a restaurant. And I think that that's probably key to my survival. I met some of the most amazing people who loved me and accepted me for who I was. And to understand at that point in my life, I didn't swear. I had never drank. I had never done drugs. I was such a prude. I would get so offended at the dirty jokes told in the kitchen. And I am so shocked sometimes when I think, how did they? But I did. I met wonderful people and had so many great experiences. And it started opening my eyes to the fact that things that I had grown up with were not okay. But even then, it still did not fully hit me. I met my husband when I was 26. Yeah. Looking back now, I can also see that our relationship was definitely affected by both of our traumas. We both grew up with traumas, and so many things that I accepted and kind of looked over, I would never have done now because I know oh my gosh, that was not okay. But we met, and he's lovely. And he was the first real, you're better than that. You don't deserve to be treated this way. I can't believe they say these things to you. Even now in your late 20s, early 30s, that they're making these comments about you, you should not accept. And I definitely believe that one of the things that saved me and put me on the path of not completely devolving is the fact that we moved away. Yeah. He joined the Navy and we moved away, and getting away from that environment helped me get perspective on how toxic it was. But even then, I made excuses, and so that's a big, there's so many little moments and things that happened to me that basically compounded the traumas.
Yes.
So, it would take, I would need to write a novel because you don't realize that the experiences that you're having and the things that you're going through are trauma. And you're told for your whole life that that's just normal. That's just how it is. When you see people fighting, when you see people beating their children on a daily basis, you kind of become like acclimated to it, so you accept that behavior. And I genuinely believe that my friends from Applebee's and meeting Kirk and everything changed that direction. And I was like, oh, I do not have to accept. And still, because of my trauma, I desperately wanted to have a whole family.
Yeah.
A whole, I wanted to forgive. I wanted to put it behind us. I really wanted to have the healing and acceptance. So I was stubbornly held on for years after I realized I didn't have to accept that treatment, and tried to just make it work. And I would say probably about 8 years ago, I really started to be like, no. And it definitely has to do with my kids coming to understand, I don't want them to repeat this. I don't want them to go through what I've been through. I need to work on me in order to help them.
You want to break the cycle, right?
Yeah.
The cycle of trauma, the cycle of abuse, and the modeling that you've had, that you've experienced. You don't want to pass that down generational.
So much, and as we might get into it, we didn't quite get there. We definitely had some time in our family where things were not well, but with the understanding of myself, and when I started therapy and started learning, and it kind of just infiltrated, and I got everybody into therapy, and it has definitely changed a lot of things. And while I know that some of the things that happened when the kids were younger will affect them, we've been in the they're getting a head start in that sense, because they're not going to grow into their 30s thinking that behavior that they experienced was okay. And we've told them, and we've worked on repairing the things that we did, and being like, what, this is not okay.
Yeah.
We're not going to normalize this behavior and make you think that this is what you need to be around and be healthy.
Well, you're talking about, the opportunity to, when a rupture happens, which it does with children when you're parenting, because nobody gets it right all of the time. It's really hard work. And when you rupture, there needs to be a repair, right? The majority of the time.
Yes.
That's the piece. And that's when I'm working with parents, we work on that. How can you, focus on the repair versus the mistake that you made, right? Because we all are human beings and we all make mistakes.
Absolutely.
So that's what you're saying is, you've messed up. Yeah, you made mistakes. Of course, me too. Mm-hmm. This is a hard life sometimes, right?
Yeah.
But the repair, both you and Kirk have been able to get to a point where you're able to do that with the children together.
Correct.
Which is powerful.
Yeah, it has been. And it's still a work in progress. I think for the rest of our lives, we'll be discovering that makes more sense now that we understand. It's like you've been speaking one language your whole life, and you've got to learn a new language. And one of the great, an analogy or whatever is when you start therapy and you start learning the language of therapy and everything else, and then you have people in your lives that haven't, it's like a butterfly trying to talk to a caterpillar. If that person hasn't done the self-reflection and inward, the work, then they are not going to understand where you're at until they go through it themselves. And that was a big key for me, is I learned, you can't make somebody do that. You know what I mean? All you can take care of is yourself.
That's right. You got to focus on you.
Yeah. So part of my childhood and my trauma made me believe that I was responsible for everyone.
Yeah.
And that I had to help everyone achieve what they wanted, or had to help everyone get to the place where they needed to be. And that was a big one for me in learning to let that go, especially with Kirk, with what we went through. For the longest time, I was like, I can do this. I can help him. I can work this out. I can. And in fact, looking back now, I was actually enabling his behaviors. to keep the peace, to make things okay, because that was my childhood. I made everything okay. Like, your behavior has to be this way so that there's no waves, and I was doing the same thing with my husband. And I think that was one of the biggest things that I took away from when I started therapy is like, holy crap, when you're repeating a generational trauma, you don't realize that you are.
That's right. It's perpetual.
Yeah.
It's still us.
Yes. It's so much of it is it. I kind of compare it to computers and how you can program a computer. And when we're children, we get programmed a certain way by the experiences that we have and the adults in our lives and how they affect us. And that program, you don't even realize it's been written.
Yeah.
And then when you start therapy, you're basically rewriting, and it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of diving into it all, because you got to rip it all out, research it.
It's a hard road. There's no doubt about it. And, obviously I know this about you, but you have excuse me, some high ACE scores, what we call ACE scores, which is early adverse childhood experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So I know we've discussed that, but you now, looking back, when I see you, and I know you, Julie, obviously, and adore you, and I just think about what a wonderful human being you are, and just how special you are in this world. Like, you're such a light, you're such a gift. You really are, and you are to a lot of people. And so I think about your experience, and this is one of the reasons that I do this work, because the process works. It takes a lot of courage to sit in the seat and look at yourself and be willing to have that courage to change you. Because like you said a few moments ago, you can't change other people. You have to focus on you.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So thinking back, based on your experience, and thank you for sharing, some of the detail of what you experienced. I know that that's really, really difficult and hard, and I'm thankful that you're able to share your story. But when you look back, how did you get to where you are now? The wisdom, the lived experience that you are here sitting with me today in September of 2024, when you look back, how did you get to where you are?
I honestly, when I saw that question, when I was getting ready to do this with you, I had a little bit of a panic attack, because I'm like, I don't know, but I do know. Yeah. I believe that initially, looking back, I think that my biological mother was a very kind person.
Yeah.
And in the 8 years that I was with her, she instilled that in me, in the sense of like, seeing nature is beautiful, take a moment to breathe and look at the beauty around us and that kind of thing. And I carried that with me. There was I think books reading.
Yeah.
Definitely saved knowledge. Yeah. So I lived not like less than a mile from our public library most of my life. And I lived there. And I would just read. And I thankfully read a lot of I would say romance and things like that, but the type of book that I was drawn to, where the heroine was confident and, knew what she was doing and was a kind person, and that informed me. And then I have what I call my bumper boats. And what I mean by that is I had people throughout my life show me kindness, give me some guidance, and kind of gave me a soft place to be, where I was able to say, oh, okay, this is how I would like to be treated, so this is how I'm going to treat others. Yeah. Right? They were a great example. The example I was getting at home would never want to repeat. But I had teachers and a couple neighbors that were kind and, kind of let me hang out with them instead of being at home and that kind of thing. And then eventually had friends that were just excellent and kind of guided me as well. And I think that the biggest part is Kirk, when I was talking to him about it, he said, you're just such a lovely person. You've had people that want to ride or die for you. And I'm like, well, I don't get it. And he's like, because it's something I'm still working on, in the sense of dismissing myself. You know what I mean? And I'm just me, but passionately my whole life, because I understood how much it hurt to be treated certain ways. I never wanted to be the person that caused that pain for someone else. So I was adamant that like the golden rule. And then, growing up in the church a little bit, I don't like to give them too much credit because they are also part of my drama. But the words of Jesus really resonated with me. And especially in the sense of like, I knew who I was deep down. Like I knew the things that I was doing that were okay. And if those were my secrets, I didn't know what other people were going through, and I didn't have any place to judge anybody else.
Yeah.
For their choices and their experiences, because I knew what my choices were. I hope that makes sense. But that was a big part of it. That was like a big key for me growing up, is I just wanted everybody to be kind because it hurt so much when people weren't, So I was adamant that I would be kind and I would help people because that's what I needed. I was the person I needed for others,
Yes.
So.
Yes. Beautifully well said. It's profound, Julie. Really is. Can you talk a little bit about your therapeutic journey? Can you talk a little bit about what that experience has been like for you?
Yeah. So I did not start therapy until I think it was late 2017, might have been 2018. And it was because of you. And so I had been having health issues for several years, and I was just devastated by the last doctor's appointment that I was at, and having dealt with people judging me for my weight my whole life and saying everything was in my head my whole life. And that's a whole other spiel of the trauma that I experienced when I came over to your house one day and I was talking to you about it. And you were like, hold on a second. We really, and you called Sarah and I started therapy. And even then I felt like, I'm fine. What's the big deal? And I remember writing a timeline out for Sarah for our first meeting and telling her like, this is what happened to me, and being very like, that's what it is,
Yeah.
Isn't
Matter
this what
of fact?
Yeah,
right? Very matter of fact.
Yeah, it's what is it a big deal? Is it a big problem? And earlier when we were talking, I only touched on a few. There were multiple instances of awful things that I went through, and she just looked at me and she's like, none of this is okay. None of what happened to you is just what happened. And she started working with me, and we were doing talk therapy quite a bit, which really helped. It just helped, I think, in the sense of having somebody not verify, but like
validate me.
Yes, thank you. Validate my experiences and the things that I was feeling, and have somebody say, yeah, it's not okay. None of those things were okay. None of that is something that you have to just say, oh, well, about. And then we did several sessions of EMDR, which was huge.
It's a very powerful modality. It's really evidence-based. It's amazing.
Love it. I love it. It helped quite a bit. Another one was talking to my former self. That was a big one. Recognizing that a lot of the stressors and things that I would go through when life was stressful was a trigger, and I didn't understand that. So I didn't understand that when I was really, really stressed out, my body basically shut down. I would feel physically ill. I didn't recognize that, and I didn't have the terms for it the way I do now. So that was a huge, huge help. I also started reading books. One of the first ones we read together, was it The Deepest Well?
Yes.
And that started talking about ACEs. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was talking about the ACEs, and I was like, holy crap, check, double check, triple check. Like, oh, okay. This explains so much about the direction my life was in and things that I thought were okay. It explains so much about how the things that I felt embarrassed by or guilty of, or the decisions that I made as a young adult. Because I say dabbled, I was off the rails for a few years in my early 20s. I did drugs, I partied, I slept around a lot,
as many teens do, age, teenagers growing up.
I was a little bit behind. I always say I was a late bloomer because I was 23 the first time I had sex, right? So, and it was horrible. It was horrible. And it was also informed by the purity culture, which is very traumatizing, that I grew up with. So that was another thing to pour onto myself of like, I'm not a good person. I'm a terrible person because I did this, when in reality, what I was looking for was love and acceptance, and I thought that was the way that I could get it, because in the society that I grew up in, a woman's value was that a man loves her and that she gets married and that she has children, and not following those steps, almost like a social scale. It's funny, like a Black Mirror episode, in the sense of like your social points, you know what I mean? I lost points for not having good credit. I lost points for not going to college. I lost points for having sex outside of marriage, and all of this stuff. And then finding out later in life that the people that I was looking to accept me and love me were doing all of those things as well, but they were able to hide it. When your parents raise you and say, you have to be this and you have to be that, but then you later find out they were doing all of these things they told you couldn't do. It's mind blowing. It's like, what? So yeah, I think that I thankfully had people in my life like you that brought me into the realm of therapy and understanding it, because I had kind of just talked myself out of everything over the years, just kind of very this is just how it was. I think you can even think back to the times when I would talk about my experiences in a very matter of fact, I had this happened to me as a kid, and you're just like, what? And I'm just like, yeah, no big deal, right? It happens. It's
minimizing, right? Because you were minimized as you were raised. And so now internally you were minimizing your own experience of what happened to you.
Yes, absolutely. And before I even started therapy, I recognized when I had my children, and when they're babies, it was easy. They're just little babies. When they started getting a little older and I had to learn how to discipline, guide, whatever, and I started to recognize the things that I grew up with coming out of me.
Yes, that's the tough piece, right? That is tough.
Hold on. This is not okay.
Yeah.
This child no, absolutely not. So even before I started therapy, I was starting to recognize that the things that I accepted as normal were not okay. Yeah. And I knew that I never wanted to lay a hand on my kids, that I never wanted to demean them and make them feel less than because of, a mistake that they made or anything like that. But you don't understand that you're doing it. Like, you can be doing it and not even recognize that you're doing it.
It's completely subconscious, right? It's under the surface, and it comes out when the parent is triggered, right? Then not in their thinking brain, let's say.
Exactly. And that was one of the first light bulb moments for me where I was like, I'm not okay. I really had disassociated to the sense of I'm good. We were a young family. We loved each other. Everything was great. The bills were paid. Life was good.
Of course.
What's the big deal? Nothing wrong with this.
But meanwhile, you're having those symptoms where you can't hardly walk, or you can't get out of bed, or you can't function right as a mom on a daily basis.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things about your story, Julie, that is really profound, is the way that you've tackled that head on. You've had a lot of somatic issues that have come up for you, and the way that you're taking control of that and just facing it and saying, there's something that I need to be able to do about this, or there's something that I can help myself in this way.
Yeah.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about maybe your somatic experience and what that has been like to kind of get to the point where you're managing it?
Yeah. So it, like most things in my life, it came to a head to a point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. Growing up as a young adult, I had a lot of moments where I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't, function. And because of the environment that I grew up in, that just meant that something was wrong with me, in the sense of I couldn't do it. Not that there was anything trauma informed, but just that there's something wrong. You're not okay. What I'm trying to say is the idea was, everybody has it. Everybody has trauma. And so if you can't function properly, that's your fault.
Yeah. There's something wrong with you. Yeah.
Right. So looking back now, I can say, oh my gosh, all those times that, I would lose a job because I would start a job and be like an amazing employee, always on time, working hard, working over, like I was a pleaser, right? So I like really dove in and went out of my way for my employers. Yeah. But then I would have what I didn't know, I would have a triggering event or something would happen and my body would shut down. Mm-hmm. The headaches, the body aches, it would almost like flu-like, just miserable. And I had no way to understand what was going on. Mm-hmm. So instead, I was told that I was lazy, unmotivated, functioning as a proper adult.
Right. Which is farthest from the truth.
Right. I was working doubly hard. I look back now and I'm like, holy crap. Yeah. So I didn't recognize it at the time, but in 2015, when my health really just spiraled out of control, and I was exercising almost every day at that time. I was taking the girls to school, taking Logan to the YMCA daycare, and I was working out. Because of my body size always having been a bigger person, I always heard that I was lazy, always heard, all the diet stuff was awful. But in 2015, I was working out one day and I felt a pop in my back. And up until that point, I had issues where I'd wake up in the morning and I could barely walk or had these headaches and my friends would come and watch the kids for me because I was immobilized. And I didn't understand that it was trauma related. I didn't understand it at the time. But we were also going through some financial struggles. And we had just moved to Virginia from Washington. So I had no friends, no like support system. It was just me and Kirk and the kids. Mm-hmm. And at that time also, Kirk was struggling because his job was horrible. And he was gone like 13 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And our finances, we got into a position of just not being able to afford everything that we were used to affording, how the military works and all that. So we lost money and ended up having to spend more money for the house. So we ended up having to file bankruptcy, which is again, and this is before I'd started therapy, so I didn't understand it, but again, a failing, right? Yes. You're a terrible person because you've had to file bankruptcy. What's wrong with you?
Well, the shame, right? The shame that you experience that comes from that.
Yes, absolutely. And I did not understand that my body was reacting to that. Mm-hmm. I didn't get that. I thought it was just because in the process of all of this, I started going to the doctor, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And of course, every single doctor's visit, you need to lose weight. The only reason you're in pain is because of your weight. And I'm like, I know people my size and bigger that aren't going through this. But because of my childhood and the same situations, that's my fault again. There's nothing here to point to why I'm experiencing this pain and why I'm going through this. And I think that was part of the key to why you were like, you need to start therapy, because I'd come from the doctor's appointment. Another one where they were like, it would be like, oh yeah, you need surgery. Oh no, you don't. Your insurance isn't approving it. Oh yeah, you need this. Oh no, you don't. And so it was such a roller coaster ride. And when I started therapy, I didn't immediately get the relief, the physical relief from my symptoms, right?
It takes time.
And it was 2017, late 2017. And it was after a few sessions of EMDR, and I started to recognize that the pain in my shoulder had started to fade. And what is going on? This is so amazing, but also and I started to learn about how our bodies get stuck in fight or flight, and how we can be, our traumas can be physical reactions in our bodies, and you can feel like headaches, muscles. Like, it's amazing when you realize it, like that your trauma can affect your physical body. And I still have pain. I definitely I think that's a big key for me. I want to give an example because it's so important to how I was informed about my body.
Yeah.
When I was 17, and understand again, I grew up my whole life hearing that my body was not okay, that I had to exercise, I had to diet, I had to work out, when in reality now, if you looked at me back then, I was like Ashley Graham, I weighed 180 in high school. I was tall. I was curvy, I probably could have been a supermodel and it had gone another way. But when I was 17, I was at a youth retreat in the mountains and started walking up a hill one day, and my knee popped. Oh, that really hurt. And so I kind of just limped around for the rest of that. And I got home and I told my parents, like, something's wrong with my knee. Every time I walk upstairs or walk uphill, it hurts really, really bad. It's like a popping. It took 2 years. I lived with that pain for 2 years before they finally said, maybe there is something wrong. Because every time I brought it up, it was, you don't want to exercise. You don't want to work out. You don't want to go to work, because I had a job at 14. I started working. You don't want to go to your work or whatever. You're just lazy. And what happened was that for 2 years, I had a bone in my knee. It's called an osteochondroma. And every time I bent my knee a certain way, it was scraping against a tendon, popping against a tendon. So that encapsulates how I felt about my physical body as an adult moving forward. Whenever I was in pain, I pushed through. When I was working 2 to 3 jobs a day, like at a time, and I would be physically just broken, I would push through. I would just push through because I had this idea that this pain isn't real. It's me making it up because I'm lazy or whatever. You never have that thought clearly in your brain. It's just there in your subconscious, right? I never physically thought to myself, I'm in pain because I'm lazy, but it was subconsciously informed because of how I was raised.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I started having health issues, even before 2015, I put it up to like, oh, I'm not exercising enough, or I'm not doing I'm eating bad, or, making excuses for it. And it genuinely wasn't until you said, you can feel your trauma in your body. And I think if you start therapy, it would definitely help. And it did. It's amazing to me, the changes. I still have bulging discs. I still have back pain. I still have to carefully navigate my day because of those things. And, I have what I call like a limit physically each day to where it's like, okay, I can, bend over this many times. I can reach above me this many times or whatever. But the constant pain is no longer. And that I genuinely believe was because at that time, not only were we going through financial struggles, but the election and the things that informed with my family and all of that and how it was affecting me. I didn't understand it in 2016, how triggered I was by it all. But the denial of the sexual harassment of, the candidate of Trump and all of that, the way my family supported him, it triggered me because it was very much like, oh, I'm telling you about the sexual assault that I experienced, and you're like, never happened.
You never what my truth, right? What I'm saying.
And I knew he was lying all the time, right? So it's like, this is just like what I grew up with. Like, the lies are right there. Like, you can see it. But my family was like, no, you're delusional. You're the one that's wrong. And I fought it for so long. I was like, okay, is there really? So I would listen to him and I would like, no, I know I'm right. Other things in my life also informed that, like growing up in the church and having friends that were gay and understanding like, no, that's not okay. Like when I was, I think 21, 2 of my closest friends came out and I had a crisis because I was like, oh, I was raised to believe that if I support them, then I'm basically condoning them to hell. Like that's where they're going to end up because I'm saying I love you anyway. And, hate the sin, love the sinner, whatever. But listening to that side of the argument and hearing my family support that was very triggering for me. And so I would have hours-long conversations with my stepfather, and I would cry and try to help them see my side of it and try to understand where they were coming from. And that was also affecting me physically. As Kirk would say, is like every time I got off the phone with my stepfather or a family member after having these discussions, I was drained. I was emotionally spent, physically, like it definitely affected me deeply and still did not break off contact for a few more years and still try to achieve that dream of the whole family, trying to like, okay, I can overlook all of this. It's my dad, and all of that. And I think a big part of why I'm functioning and standing and moving forward is because I went no contact a little over 4 years ago. That was like an aha moment of clarity, and just like the realities and the things that I believed about myself were informed by their perspectives, and what I knew in here was really real, and all that self-doubt started to go away. It's still there. It still pops its head up sometimes, but now I've got the language and the information of like, nope, take a reality check for a minute, sit here and think about where this thought is coming from.
Yes.
And what's informing it, and I still have to catch myself sometimes, because I'll do that and I'll be like when we were talking about doing this, and I'm like, I thought, the person for this, but in reality, I am. I really want to like let people know that their experiences are valid and their feelings are valid. You know what I mean? And to pull themselves away from outward influence and take that time to look inward. And it's scary because I'm not a perfect person. I had to face things about myself that weren't because of them. You know what I mean? Like things that I had become and that I had made a part of myself, and be like, oh, okay, and took a lot. Like, I guess in some circles it's called shadow work.
Yes.
Where you have to look at the bad part of yourself too. Yes.
Hey, one of the sayings that I remember from my kind of university days of studying this work is that the body remembers what the mind forgets. It's a Jacob L. Moreno saying, and he's a psychodramatist. And that kind of encapsulates to me what you're talking about in just a more of a simplistic way, but because it's complicated. Trauma is complicated, and everybody experiences trauma in a different way. But the message that you're saying is that if you look inward, and if you ask for help, if you lean into the support and the resources that are given, that you can get on the path to healing. Not everybody is going to need to cut up their family members, right?
No, that's right.
Not everybody is going to be able to do that. But the message that I hear is you can go through extremely difficult, life-changing, horrible things, and you can heal from it. There is a potential recovery, which is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think a big part of it was Kirk and I both recognizing that for our kids, we wanted more.
Yes.
That we didn't want them to have to be in therapy and learning a new language as an adult, that if we were going to do anything to change for ourselves, that it was for them as well. In the sense of like, I think one of the tragedies of our society is that so many of us are experiencing trauma without the supports. It's something I tell my kids all the time when they're dealing with kids at school that are bullies or whatever. And I'm like, I know it's not the greatest thing to hear, but to try to understand that if they are behaving in this manner, there's something going on in their lives that is affecting them in that way to make them behave this way. Because children don't hate.
No,
children, small children, yes, it is very much learned behavior. And that's a big part. I talk to my kids all the time about the computer programming analogy. Like when I'm telling them what you're watching, what you're listening to, what you're reading, all of this informs your internal systems. And so it's really, really important that you are paying attention to what you're ingesting, like with social media, with books, with whatever. Everything is internal. It gets into the programming, and I think, like you said, that's a big part of why I made it through is because I was a voracious reader. And so like, I love to say that I read books like Clan of the Cave Bear in like the 6th grade.
I have not read that.
Oh, it's amazing. It's a little adult. There are like some adult aspects to it, But the key part was the main character is the heroine of the story is different from the people she's raised by, you know, and they have strengths and weaknesses on both aspects. You know, she's raised by the Neanderthals, but she is a human, like farther along in the evolution, right? She's more of what we are now, like or standing taller, facial features, whatever. And in her story, she gets separated from her biological family and is raised by these people who see her physical attributes as weaknesses, but in reality, they are her strengths. And she learns that they have strengths that people like her look at as weaknesses, you know, but it was her aspect of like caring for herself, loving nature and the environment and learning things to support herself that I really took to, you know, and it was heroines like that in books that I read that really informed me as far as like, this is who I want to be, you know, I want to be a good person. And so, and the craziest part is because of the things that I did as a kid and as a young adult, I didn't necessarily believe that I was a good person, when in reality, good people can do bad things. And I have to learn that, you know, you can be a loving parent and still screw up with your kids, you know, that doesn't make you a bad person. I think that was a big key when it came to my stepfather. And part of the reason that I went no contact was because for years, the forgiveness was there. I was willing to forgive. That they, especially as a parent, I was like, okay, parenting is not easy. Parenting is not easy. And he did it for several years as a single parent. And he did not have the language and the things in place that we do now, in the sense of like people talking about traumas and things like that. Like he was born in 1952. You know, the way his society was informed, he genuinely believes that that's how it should be. So I was willing to set all of that aside and be like, you really messed up. You really, really, and he, you know, he would say that. He would be like, he would admit that he didn't do well as a parent, that he made a lot of mistakes. But in talking to him, he would still continue to treat me like he did when I was younger. And understanding and being like, so one of the things that happened is in 2011, he divorced his third wife. It was my stepmom that he married when I was like 14, 16. They started dating when I was 14. They got married when I was 16. And when he divorced her, he started therapy. And I was like, okay, we can finally start talking about this stuff and we can like really let it air out and like put it behind us and things like that. And it really felt like that. For a brief period of time, I was like, we're going to move forward and we're going to put all that crappy life behind us, right? But I started to recognize that he was saying the right things until it came to something that he still was like, you don't know what you're talking about. Or, you know, I don't think it was that serious. So one of the things that really set me free was when I went no contact, he wrote a letter. He wrote a 17-page letter. And in it, he tries to excuse and explain some of the things. He called them, he said, she's really focused on her hurts and some of the lesser hurts. And one of the things he put in as a lesser hurt was my SA as a child. And so it was like, oh, like I really, you did not actually ever change your belief or whatever. So I guess what I'm saying is like understanding that you can't change people, that you can't bring them with you if they're not willing to also do the work. And that there are going to be aspects of family relationships where you can keep those people in your life, but with the boundaries. You know what I mean? And there are some people in my life that I still have, but with boundaries. But then there are others where the healthier choice is to go no contact because they will not respect those boundaries. And he never did. On all the years after 2011, after the hours and hours and hours of conversations, he still would say things that were very hurtful and very much informed me that he still had the belief that nothing I said was really that big a deal. Nothing that I experienced was that big of an issue, and that I should just get over it. You know?
Yeah. And it sounds like it got to the point where you just were like, I don't have to I haven't set boundaries for myself. I don't have to hear this anymore. I don't have to listen to it. I don't believe it. It's not true. This does not work for me.
Yeah. And a big part of that was when we moved to Washington and I met you and Becca. And I think it's kind of amazing, like that the universe was like, here, I'm going to surround you with people that have this language you need to learn.
I mean, Becca does too. Yeah.
Genuinely. And, you know, it definitely informed my choices in the sense of like, when you're raised in a certain environment and that's all you know, it's very difficult to see outside of that.
Yeah.
So when I was able to move away from that environment and I started learning this new language, and it made so much more sense to me, and it showed me that the things that I grew up learning were not okay.
Yes.
You know, that perspective was completely unhealthy and detrimental to my goals of wanting to raise happy, healthy children.
Yeah.
You know? And yeah, I think one of the flags for me is recognizing as my children were getting a little older that I would never want them to go spend time with my family without me there. And that was a big, like, there's something there, you know?
You got to listen to whatever that intuitive sense is that's telling you. Yeah. And I'm aware of time, Julie, and I've been just so loving having this conversation. But I do really want to ask, for other trauma survivors that are out there that maybe have not gotten on the healing journey yet, or there are obstacles in the way, they can't find resources, what would you say to them? What would you say to other trauma survivors that are listening to that?
The first part, if you don't have support, friends, family, or even the therapist or whatever, is to take time to work inside of yourself and to, I would say, ground or learn about grounding. You can Google it, go to the library, get some books out about it, but to give yourself the grace and the understanding that the experiences that you had don't have to lock you in to a set of behaviors or to a certain lifestyle. That if you are not happy with the way your life is going or the direction that it is going, it's okay to say, hold on. I need a moment. I need some time to like really dive in and think about where I want my life to go, you know, what direction you want to go in. And that if you aren't around people that support you and that can say, absolutely, you know, you need help and we're going to be here for you, to try to find those people. It's not easy. It's easier said than done in that sense. But like that idea that when you're having to learn a new language, you need to immerse yourself, right? So if you can find a support group or read more books about it, or even like the amazing part of TikTok is that there are so many wonderful therapists and people on there sharing their stories. And you can learn about that and learn some of the things that they're using in the tools that they have. And, you know, depending on where you live, there may even be free resources. I know here in Washington, they have so many therapeutic resources for people that are free, you know, where you can make phone calls and just talk to somebody. And having that validation of somebody saying, oh yeah, like that really was a key moment for me, for somebody to say, none of what you experienced was okay. Yeah, let's help you figure out how to move forward from that, you know, and that you can, no matter where you're at right now, you can move forward. You can grow and change, but it has to be the steps that you take, that no one's going to come in and do it for you. You know, that's a big one. You can sit there and I did for the longest time. I dissociated. Favorite TV shows, reading romance novels, you know, basically la 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 la, it's not happening, you know. But there comes a point where you have to like take it to yourself and be like, okay, these awful things happen to me, but they're not the only thing about me.
Yeah.
You know, and that you can reach out and understand. I think one of the biggest things that I found helpful was realizing my story was not unique, you know, that so many people went through similar things that I did. Yeah. And that they also can come out of it and move forward and learn about it and change their behaviors and things like that. Because I had a lot of behaviors that I had to change, not just negative self-talk, but parts of the behaviors, like I was stealing, I was purposely writing bad checks. Financially wise, I was making all the wrong choices as a young person. And that compounded my negative view of myself. When in reality, now I understand that it was part of my trauma and part of how I was trying to cope, And so you have to kind of forgive yourself for things that you do that are trauma related. And you have to give yourself, that's the biggest one, give yourself grace. First and foremost, no matter what your reactions were to your traumas, give yourself grace, because those traumas happened to you and they affected you.
Yeah.
And don't let anybody tell you that that's not part of it, that it really does affect you, and that's okay, and that you can move forward. One of the books I read, I'm terrible at remembering the names of books, but it was a great book, and it was about an actor. I'm not going to be able to remember his name, but he's a very much character actor. He's been in a lot of books or a lot of movies, and he's like a rough Mexican guy. He's got scars all over his face and stuff. And he wrote an autobiography.
He was in Sons of Anarchy.
Yes. And a couple other ones. But he wrote this great book, and he talks about growing up in California in the gangs and all the things that he did. He killed people. He did horrible things because that was the environment that he grew up in. And he went to prison. And while he was in prison, he was guided in a different direction, and he started reading, started learning about trauma and these things, and has completely changed his life around, and I genuinely believe that no matter where you are, you can change the direction. And I definitely believe in reformation, and that people can make horrible choices, life-changing choices, and still come back from that every person has that ability to, get away from addiction, get away from self-sabotaging behaviors, because that's a lot of what I was doing and that kind of thing. And that one step at a time, one day, 1 hour, 1 minute, whatever you need to do each moment, don't take it lightly. You know what I mean? Just recognize, hey, I got up today. I got out of bed. I'm moving forward for now. This is good. And to give yourself the ability to say, I can do this. If it's only for an hour, I can look for support. Give yourself 20 minutes to go online and try to find something that helps you relate or whatever, and then the next 20 minutes is going to be, I'm going to take care of myself. Yeah. So I think that's a big key for people.
Thank you so much for sharing, Julie. I'm just so grateful that you are here. You're courageous and you're sharing your story. I adore you. Thank you.
I love you.
Hopefully somebody else listening to this, it will help them. So thank you for being here and sharing your story. Thank you.